Hello, and welcome back to the studio. I'm Dr. Wiggo, and today we're going to talk about the shuffling at the executive suite at Apple and what that means for Apple and what that could mean for us. Things are happening. So on April 20th, or 4/20, Apple dropped the announcement that as of September 1st, John Ternus is going to become the new CEO, and Tim Cook is going to be kind of promoted to executive chairman. He'll still be around, and this is going to be important in a minute. They also announced that Johny Srouji was named chief hardware officer, which is a higher position than John Ternus held before his promotion, but kind of the same position. If you've watched Apple keynotes, you know these people because John Ternus was always doing the hardware stuff. You know, Tim Cook would throw to Ternus and he'd talk about stuff. And Johny Srouji was the guy who did Apple Silicon. And in the keynotes, he was the guy down in the lab where he was always showing off the speeds and feeds and all that stuff. So you may have some questions like, why did they announce this in April when it's not going to happen until September? Well, this is to soothe the investors because 10 days after this announcement, they made their earnings announcement on the 30th, and revenues were up 17% year over year, and earnings per share were up 22% year over year, and they announced another $100 billion stock repurchase plan, which will help pump the stock up. Okay, but why wait until September 1st? Waiting till September 1st gives Tim Cook kind of a victory lap. So like at WWDC in June, they can both be there and both talk about stuff, and Tim can still be the guy. But the big announcements in September will be the iPhone 18 Pro and Max and the iPhone Ultra. The rumor is the foldable phone will be called the iPhone Ultra. And then John Ternus can be the star of that show as the new CEO. So everybody gets some screen time, everybody gets some face recognition. It's good for everybody. If you're not an Apple geek like me, you may be wondering, well, who is John Ternus? Where did he come from? Again, you've seen him in the videos of the product announcements. He's been the hardware guy for a while. But he started out with a bachelor in mechanical engineering from the University of Pennsylvania in 1997, and his first job was he joined a company called Virtual Research Systems designing VR headsets. Wait a minute, the Vision Pro was the only major hardware product that he did not oversee while he was running all the hardware stuff while he was at Apple, and he was allegedly opposed to it. But anyway, he joined Apple in 2001 on the product design team for the Apple Cinema display. So he started small. And then in 2013, he became VP of Hardware Engineering, where he was responsible for AirPads, Macs, and iPads. And then in 2020, he was also put in charge of the iPhone. And in 2021, he was promoted again to Senior Vice President of Hardware Engineering, which is what they call a C-suite position, because now he's reporting directly to the CEO. And then in 2022, he was also put in charge of the Apple Watch. And then, of course, on 4/20, he was named the new CEO. But he's got some big shoes to fill. Because in 1997, Steve Jobs came back to Apple as CEO, and back then their revenues were $7 billion, and they had lost $1 billion the year before, and their market cap was like $1.5 billion. But Steve Jobs came in with this product focus that led to some big successes, the iPod and the iPhone. And Tim Cook was part of all that too in his operations position, which you can see in my video tribute to Tim Cook that I did a couple of months ago. And then in 2011, of course, Tim Cook became the CEO when Steve Jobs sadly passed away. And at that point, Apple's revenues were $108 billion, their profits were $26 billion, and their market cap was $350 billion. So they'd come a long, long way under Steve Jobs and Tim Cook. Again, see this video. Since Tim Cook has been CEO, operations and services were kind of the focus, and that led to big financial improvements, especially in margins. Again, I talk about that in that video. But Tim Cook was mainly an operations guy, and the hardware division was being driven by John Ternus, who is now becoming the CEO on September 1st, and so we back to a product guy. But John Ternus has a little bit of an uphill battle, because he's taking over a company with $416 billion in revenues, $112 billion in profits, and a market cap of almost $3.8 trillion. It's going to be hard to duplicate the success of Tim Cook when you're starting at such a high level. And he'll be taking over when there's a lot of headwinds in the computer industry. We have the RAM and SSD crisis because of AI and all that. But Tim Cook will still be around to help him with all that stuff. There's their over-reliance on China. But again, Tim Cook will still be around to help with that stuff. But his main problem will be taking over after record-breaking financial results. This last quarter was Apple's greatest quarter ever that didn't have Christmas in it. So there's a lot of turbulence ahead for Apple, but of course Apple is a big ship, and big ships weather storms better than smaller ones, so they may be okay. Of course, Ternus is also taking over with a lot of tailwinds behind him because the MacBook Neo was their most successful computer launch ever. In their earnings call on April 30th, Tim Cook just waxed eloquent about how big the launch was of the MacBook Neo. And in the earnings call, Tim Cook also said the iPhone 17 was their most successful iPhone ever. Oh, and who was in charge of that project? John Ternus. And of course, the growth in services that I talked about in this video that Tim Cook has overseen, that'll just keep going and growing and improving margins even more. Plus, Apple has a really deep bench in the product pipeline. We have an iPad mini coming with a larger OLED. These are all rumors, by the way. The Mac Mini M5 and M5 Pro, the Mac Studio M5 Pro and M5 Max, the Apple Watch Series 12, the HomePod Mini 2, which we've been waiting for forever, the Home Hub, the Apple TV 4K, which we've been waiting for a while, an Apple Smart Home Camera, new product category, still a rumor, AirPods 5, AirPods Ultra, and an M5 Max iMac. And who's been working on all those behind the scenes? John Ternus. Plus the rumored smart glasses, the iPhone 18 and 18e, and maybe an Air 2. That'll be in spring 2027. And 2027 is the year of the 20th anniversary iPhone, so you know they're going to do something special for that. And there's been all sorts of rumors you can go read about where the screen is going to roll over the edges, and you know how people are with rumors. And my personal favorite rumored product, the tabletop robot. What? Apparently it's going to be an arm with maybe an iPad in it, and it's going to do stuff. This is not coming this year, and maybe not even next year, but allegedly they are working on it. So I think John Ternus was an excellent choice because we went from Jobs, a product guy, to Cook, an operations guy, and now we're going back to a product guy. And who's been the product guy while Tim Cook has been the operations guy. So we have a lot of continuity there. And John Ternus is the same age that Tim Cook was when Tim Cook became CEO. So he's probably got a good 15 years in him. So if everything goes well, we're in for a fun ride. Maybe not the investors so much because of all the headwinds and turbulence I talked about, but we consumers for all the new products they're going to bring out, and they're just going to keep expanding. Mark Gurman just had a report about 6 new product categories that Apple's going into. I mentioned some of them, the smart glasses, the tabletop robot, among others. So John Ternus will have his work cut out for him, but I think he may be the best guy for the job. And don't forget Johny Srouji moving up to take over the rest of hardware so that Ternus can focus on more CEO type stuff. And don't forget Tim Cook will still be there. So for things like having to deal with governments and President Trump and all that kind of stuff, Tim Cook can still do that and let Ternus focus on what he does best, which is develop cool new hardware products for us to buy. So I'm very bullish on this move, and the market seems to be, but kind of hard to tell because they wove it in with this new earnings thing. So one of the hardest things about analyzing stocks is figuring out which news is triggering movements in which direction. So does the market like John Ternus being the new CEO, or they just like the big profits they just got? We're just going to have to wait and see, but I think he's going to do a decent job because he's the guy that's been pushing the hardware forward all this time while Tim Cook was CEO, and now he's going to be in charge and still helping push the hardware forward, although less hands-on. So I think the future is bright for Apple, and I think the future is really bright for us in the Apple ecosystem, because if they start adding cameras and basically all the accessories that all the other companies do for their stuff, the Apple walled garden can just get bigger and bigger and bigger until Apple can just control everything, which I know some people won't like. But people like me, if you can make it easier and I can have a one-stop and one thing, and if Smart Siri comes along, that's the headwind I failed to mention was software. That's where he's got the problems, and that's not what he's good at. Let's hope he can put some people in charge of the software areas and get that Smart Siri working so that all this stuff will work together and we can just tell our phones or our watches or whatever we're wearing, our AirPods, what we want it to do, and it can turn lights off and turn on cameras, and I think the future is bright. So welcome John Ternus to the hot seat. I know you've been there before as the head of hardware, but now you're really going to be there because you're going to be out there out front, in front of everybody, making all the big announcements, and we'll see how that goes. So that's it for today. Thanks for stopping by. See you next time. Bye-bye. Now I got to go figure out what I'm going to talk about next week. Thanks for staying to the end. Bye-bye.